Right. So we're diving into GERD today,
Uh-huh.
and we're using information from a gastroenterologist's website
Yeah.
for this deep dive.
Okay.
Dealing with GERD
Yeah.
can be like super frustrating.
It is.
So if you are looking for information and practical advice,
Yeah.
you are in the right place. You finish a delicious meal, and then bam, that burning sensation in your chest. Is it just heartburn? Is it something more serious? We're going to decode what's happening in your body, explore why it's happening, and most importantly, figure out what you can do about it. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is GERD? And why does it feel like a volcano erupting in your chest?
Great question. GERD stands for gastroesophageal reflux disease, which sounds really complicated, but it's actually a pretty simple concept. Basically, it's when the acid from your stomach flows back up into your esophagus, the tube that connects your mouth to your stomach. Imagine a leaky faucet. Instead of the water staying in the sink, it's splashing back up onto the counter. That's kind of what's happening with GERD. The acid irritates the lining of your esophagus, and that's what causes that burning sensation we call heartburn.
Okay, so it's all about that backflow of acid. Makes sense. But isn't a little heartburn normal now and then? How do we know when it's actually crossed the line into GERD territory?
That's a really important point. Occasional heartburn is totally normal. We've all experienced it. But if it's happening frequently, like more than twice a week, or if it's severe and interfering with your daily life, then it's time to pay attention. That's usually a sign that something more might be going on. And GERD is a likely suspect.
Got it. So GERD is like heartburn's more serious cousin. But here's the thing. I've heard it can be sneaky and show up in ways that aren't so obvious, like you might not always get that classic heartburn. What are some other signs that you might have GERD lurking beneath the surface?
You're absolutely right. It's not always a straightforward diagnosis. Besides the burning sensation in your chest, other common symptoms include acid reflux, where you taste that sour stomach acid in your mouth, or regurgitation, which is when food or liquid comes back up into your throat. You might also experience chest pain, difficulty swallowing, or a persistent cough, especially at night.
Chest pain. That sounds pretty scary.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know if it's GERD or something more serious?
That's a great question. And it's always best to err on the side of caution. While GERD can cause chest pain, it's essential to rule out any heart-related issues with your doctor. They can run some tests to determine the cause of the pain and make sure you're getting the appropriate treatment.
Okay, so better safe than sorry.
Right.
But wait, you mentioned a cough. How does GERD cause a cough?
When that stomach acid comes back up, it can irritate your airways, triggering a cough reflex. Some people even develop asthma-like symptoms because of GERD. It's amazing how interconnected our bodies are, right?
Totally. So we've covered the basics of what GERD is and how it manifests, but the million-dollar question is why? Why does this happen? What are the underlying causes of this whole digestive drama?
Well, there's not always one single cause, but rather a combination of factors that contribute to GERD. Let's unpack some of the usual suspects.
Okay, lay it on me. I'm ready to get to the bottom of this.
One of the biggest culprits is something we can often control: our weight. Carrying extra weight, especially around the midsection, puts pressure on your stomach, which can push acid back up into your esophagus. Even a small amount of weight loss can make a significant difference in reducing reflux.
So those late-night snack attacks might be doing more harm than good.
You got it. And it's not just about what we eat, but also about how we eat. Eating large meals puts a lot of strain on your stomach, increasing the chances of reflux. It's like trying to cram too much stuff into a suitcase. Something's bound to spill out.
Makes sense. So smaller, more frequent meals are the way to go. What else should we be mindful of?
Timing is also key. Avoid lying down right after a meal. Give your stomach at least 3 hours to digest before hitting the hay. Otherwise, you're basically inviting gravity to help that acid flow back up.
So no more midnight snacks.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough, but I'm willing to try. What else can we do to keep that acid in check?
Well, there are certain foods and drinks that are known GERD triggers. Things like spicy foods, citrus fruits, tomatoes, chocolate fatty foods, coffee, and alcohol can all relax the lower esophageal sphincter, or LES, which is the muscle that acts like a valve between your esophagus and stomach. When the LES is relaxed, it's easier for acid to sneak back up.
So basically all the good stuff is off limits. That's
Yeah.
a bummer.
Not necessarily. It's about finding a balance and figuring out your personal triggers. Not everyone reacts the same way to every food. Some people can handle spicy foods just fine, while others get heartburn from a single slice of pizza. It's all about paying attention to your body and how it responds to different foods.
Okay, so keeping a food journal might be a good idea. What about things we can't control, like pregnancy? I've heard that can be a big trigger for GERD.
Absolutely. Hormonal changes and the growing baby can put pressure on the stomach, increasing the likelihood of reflux. But don't worry, it's usually temporary and resolves after delivery.
Yes, that's good to know. Are there any other medical conditions that can contribute to GERD?
Yes, there's a condition called a hiatal hernia, which is when part of your stomach pushes up through an opening in your diaphragm, the muscle that separates your chest from your abdomen. This can weaken the LES, making it easier for acid to escape.
So it's like your stomach is trying to stage a prison break into your chest cavity. Not cool.
Exactly. And speaking of things that aren't cool, let's not forget about smoking. It weakens the LES and increases acid production, making you much more susceptible to GERD. Yet another reason to kick that habit to the curb.
Preach. Okay, so we've got weight, diet, pregnancy, hiatal hernia, and smoking. Is there anything else we need to add to our GERD hit list?
One last thing, and it's a big one: stress. When we're stressed, our bodies go into fight or flight mode and digestion takes a backseat. This can lead to increased acid production and slower stomach emptying, which can exacerbate GERD symptoms. It's that mind-body connection at play again.
Ugh, stress. It really does mess with everything, doesn't it? So we've got a pretty good understanding of the potential culprits behind GERD, but let's say you're experiencing some of these symptoms and thinking, okay, I need to talk to my doctor about this. What's the next step? What should you expect when you go in for a GERD checkup?
Well, the first thing your doctor will do is ask you a lot of questions about your symptoms. When they occur, what triggers them, what makes them better or worse. They'll want a detailed history to get a clear picture of what's going on. It's like they're putting together a puzzle, and your symptoms are the pieces.
So it's like a detective game, trying to track down the source of the problem. I'm into it. But what happens after the interrogation? I mean, after the questioning? What kind of tests might they run to confirm the diagnosis?
That's where things get a bit more technical. Depending on your symptoms and medical history, your doctor might recommend some tests to get a better look at what's happening inside.
Okay, now we're getting into the slightly scarier territory. Tell me more. What kind of tests are we talking about?
One common test is an upper endoscopy, which involves using a thin, flexible tube with a camera on the end to examine the lining of your esophagus and stomach. It sounds a lot more intimidating than it actually is.
So they're basically sending a tiny submarine into your digestive system. That's kind of cool when you think about it. But seriously, is it painful?
Not at all. You'll be given a sedative to help you relax. And most people don't feel a thing. It allows your doctor to see if there's any damage, inflammation, or other abnormalities that could be causing your symptoms.
Okay, endoscopy check. Are there any other tests they might run?
Another common test is called pH monitoring, where a small sensor is placed in your esophagus to measure the level of acid over a 24-hour period. It helps determine if and when acid is refluxing and causing those pesky symptoms.
So it's like a little acidity tracker for your insides. I'm all about data.
Exactly. Data is key to understanding what's going on and coming up with the right treatment plan. Sometimes your doctor might also recommend an esophageal manometry, which measures the strength and coordination of the muscles in your esophagus when you swallow.
So it's a strength test for your food tube. What's the purpose of that?
It helps rule out any motility problems, meaning issues with how the muscles in your esophagus move food down into your stomach. If the muscles aren't working properly, it can contribute to reflux.
Fascinating. So we've got these high-tech tests to help pinpoint the problem. But what if, after all that the verdict is in, you've got GERD, what happens next? How do we tackle this fiery beast and get back to enjoying life and food without fear?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we'll be diving into in part 2 of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the fiery world of GERD. In part 1, we explored the what and the why behind this common digestive disorder, but now comes the part I'm sure you've all been waiting for. What can we actually do about it? How do we put out this fire and reclaim our lives? And our menus.
It's time to shift from understanding GERD to conquering it. And the good news is there are a lot of effective treatment options out there.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the first line of defense?
Often the best place to start is with lifestyle modifications. These are simple changes you can make to your daily habits that can have a big impact on your symptoms. Think of it as building a solid foundation for GERD management.
Okay, I'm ready for a lifestyle makeover. Give me all the tips and tricks.
One of the simplest yet most effective changes you can make is adjusting your eating habits. We talked earlier about how large meals can trigger reflux. So instead of 3 big meals a day, try eating smaller, more frequent meals. It's like giving your stomach smaller, more manageable tasks to handle.
So it's all about portion control. Makes sense.
Yeah.
What else can we do in the food department?
Pay attention to the types of foods you're eating. We discussed those common GERD triggers. like spicy foods, citrus fruits, tomatoes, fatty foods, chocolate coffee, and alcohol. Now, I'm not saying you have to completely eliminate these from your diet, but being mindful of how they affect you and moderating your intake can make a big difference.
Okay, so it's not about deprivation, but about making smarter choices. I can handle that. What about the way we eat? Does that matter?
Absolutely. One simple tip is to eat slowly and chew your food thoroughly. This not only aids digestion, but also helps prevent overeating, which we know can put extra pressure on the stomach and trigger reflux.
Slow down and savor, got it.
Yeah.
Any other dining etiquette tips for us GERD sufferers?
Here's a big one. Avoid eating close to bedtime. Give your stomach at least 3 hours to digest before you lie down. Remember, gravity is not your friend when it comes to GERD.
So no more midnight snacking raids on the fridge. Darn it. But I get it. We want to give our bodies time to process everything before we hit the hay. Speaking of sleep, can the way we sleep affect GERD?
You bet. Elevating the head of your bed by 6 to 8 inches can help prevent nighttime reflux. You can do this by using extra pillows or placing blocks under the head of your bed frame. It's a simple tweak that can make a world of difference.
So I'm basically building a pillow fort to protect myself from acid attacks. I'm into it. What about things like clothing? Can what we wear affect our symptoms?
Believe it or not, yes. Tight clothing, especially around your waist, can put pressure on your stomach and contribute to reflux. Opt for looser-fitting styles to give your stomach some breathing room. Comfort is key.
So yoga pants are officially GERD-friendly attire. I knew there was a reason I love them so much.
Okay.
So we've covered food, sleep, and clothing. What other lifestyle adjustments can we make to tame this GERD beast?
One of the most impactful changes you can make if you're a smoker is to quit. Smoking weakens the LES, increases acid production, and makes you much more vulnerable to GERD and a whole host of other health problems.
Yeah, smoking is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Ditch it. But what about something a little harder to control? Like stress. We talked earlier about how stress can worsen GERD symptoms. Are there any lifestyle changes that can help manage stress and in turn manage GERD-AU?
Absolutely. It's all about finding healthy coping mechanisms that work for you. Regular exercise, yoga, meditation, deep breathing techniques. These can all help calm your nervous system and reduce stress levels, which can have a positive ripple effect on your GERD symptoms.
So it's not just about what we eat, but also about how we live. Mindful eating, stress management, getting enough sleep, it's all connected. It's like a holistic approach to digestive health.
Precisely. It's about taking care of your whole self.
Okay, all this lifestyle stuff is great, but let's be real. Sometimes those changes alone aren't enough to put out the fire. That's where medications come in.
Right. You got it. Medications can be a powerful tool in the fight against GERD, providing relief from symptoms and helping to heal any damage to your esophagus.
Okay, let's break down the medication options. What's the first line of defense?
Antacids are often the first step. They work by neutralizing stomach acid, providing quick relief from heartburn. They're like little firefighters putting out those flames in your chest.
I'm familiar with those. Tums Rolaids, those are the classic antacids, right?
Exactly. They're readily available over the counter and can be a lifesaver when you're in a pinch. But if you're experiencing frequent or more severe heartburn, your doctor might recommend something a bit stronger. H2 blockers.
H2 blockers. What are those and how are they different from antacids?
H2 blockers like Pepcid AC or Zantac work by reducing the amount of acid your stomach produces. They take a little longer to kick in than antacids, but they provide longer-lasting relief, usually for up to 12 hours.
So if antacids are the firefighters, H2 blockers are more like the fire prevention team.
That's a great analogy. Now, if those options aren't cutting it, we bring in the heavy hitters. Proton pump inhibitors or PPIs.
Yes, the PPIs. I've heard a lot about these.
Yeah.
What are they exactly and are they safe to take long-term?
PPIs like Prilosec Nexium and Prevacid are the most potent acid reducers we have. They work by blocking the enzyme in the stomach that produces acid. Think of it as turning off the faucet instead of just mopping up the spills.
So they essentially shut down the acid factory. Sounds effective.
Yeah.
But what about those long-term safety concerns I've heard about?
I understand your concern. There have been some studies suggesting potential risks associated with long-term PPI use. But the good news is that more recent research has provided reassuring evidence.
Okay, that's good to hear. What does the latest research say?
For example, a large study called the COMPASS trial found no significant increase in the risk of adverse events, like heart problems, pneumonia, bone fractures, kidney disease, or dementia among those taking PPIs long-term.
That's a huge relief. So it's safe to say that if your doctor prescribes a PPI for GERD, you can take it as directed without worrying about those scary side effects.
Exactly. Of course, it's always important to discuss any concerns with your doctor and to take medications only as prescribed. But this research provides strong evidence that PPIs are safe for long-term use when appropriate. It's also worth mentioning that long-term PPI use can sometimes lead to low B12 levels, so your doctor might recommend a daily B12 supplement as a preventative measure.
Interesting. So we've got antacids for quick relief H2 blockers for longer lasting action and PPIs for the really tough cases. But wait, I heard there's a new medication on the block for GERD. What's the scoop on this Viokenza?
You're right. There's a new kid on the block called Viokenza, vonoprazan, and it's generating a lot of buzz. It's a potassium competitive acid blocker, or PCA for short, and it works a bit differently than traditional acid reducers.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What makes Viokenza so special?
Well, for starters, it kicks in faster than PPIs and provides more consistent acid control throughout the day.
So it's like a supercharged PPI. Sign me up.
Not so fast. It's still relatively new, so it might not be as widely available or affordable as other options. Plus, as with any new medication, we need more long-term data to assess its safety and efficacy fully, but it's definitely something to keep on your radar and discuss with your doctor.
Okay, so we've got a whole arsenal of medications to combat GERD, but what about surgery? When does that become an option?
Surgery is typically considered a last resort, reserved for people with severe GERD who haven't found relief through lifestyle changes and medications, or for those with complications like strictures, which are narrowings of the esophagus.
What kind of surgery are we talking about? Is it a major procedure?
In the past, the most common procedure was a Nissen fundoplication, which involves wrapping the upper part of the stomach around the lower esophagus to strengthen the LES and prevent reflux.
So they're basically giving the LES a little extra support. Pretty invasive.
It is. And while it's effective, it can have some downsides, including side effects like difficulty swallowing gas and bloating. However, there's a newer, less invasive procedure called the LANX procedure that's showing promising results.
The LANX procedure. Tell me more. I love cutting-edge medical stuff.
The LANX procedure involves implanting a small ring of magnetic beads around the LES. The beads help keep the valve closed to prevent reflux, but allow it to open when you swallow so food can pass through.
So it's like a tiny magnetic gatekeeper working 24/7 to keep that acid in check. That's incredible.
It is pretty amazing. And the best part is that the LANX procedure has fewer complications than traditional surgery, and it can even be reversed if necessary.
Wow, that's impressive. So from lifestyle changes to medications to cutting-edge procedures, it seems like we've got a lot of options for tackling GERD. But I imagine it can still be a challenge to navigate daily life with this condition. Even with all these tools at our disposal, what advice do you have for people who are trying to live their best lives despite GERD?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we'll be diving into in part 3 of our deep dive. We'll explore practical tips and strategies for managing GERD and living a full, vibrant life, even with this condition. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground on this GERD journey, from understanding the science behind it to exploring a whole arsenal of treatments. But now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How do we actually live with this condition? And dare I say, thrive?
That's the ultimate goal, right?
Okay.
To not let GERD control our lives. And the good news is there are so many practical things we can do to manage our symptoms and live fully even with GERD.
Okay, so let's dive into these practical tips. I'm ready to arm myself with all the knowledge I can get. What are some simple changes we can make in our daily routines?
Well, we've talked about diet and lifestyle modifications, but there are other little things that can make a surprisingly big difference. For example, did you know that chewing sugar-free gum after meals can help reduce reflux?
Really? Chewing gum? I'm all for easy fixes, but how does that work?
Chewing gum stimulates saliva production, and saliva acts as a natural antacid. It helps neutralize any acid that might be lingering in your esophagus after a meal, sort of like a mini car wash for your food tube.
Okay, that's a surprisingly simple and pleasant way to combat reflux.
Yeah.
I'm adding sugar-free gum to my grocery list as we speak. What else have you got?
Let's talk sleep. We already mentioned elevating the head of your bed, which is a must-do, but did you know that sleeping on your left side can also help?
I've heard that before, but I've always wondered why. What's the science behind that?
It's all about anatomy. When you sleep on your left side, your stomach is positioned below your esophagus, which makes it harder for acid to flow back up. Gravity becomes your ally, so to speak.
So it's like strategic sleeping. I could totally get on board with that. Any other sleep-related tips?
Make sure you're giving yourself enough time to digest before hitting the hay. We talked about the 3-hour rule earlier. And try to create a relaxing bedtime routine to minimize stress, which we know can worsen GERD.
Okay, so strategic sleeping, relaxing evenings. Got it. What about during the day? Are there any little things we can do to stay ahead of those GERD gremlins?
Staying hydrated is key. Sipping water throughout the day helps dilute stomach acid, making it less irritating if it does reflux. Think of it as your internal fire extinguisher.
Water, nature's GERD remedy. I like it. What about those times when we're faced with tempting foods that we know might trigger our symptoms? Do we have to live a life of complete deprivation?
Not at all. It's all about finding a balance and making mindful choices. If you know certain foods are triggers for you, try to limit your intake or find alternative ways to enjoy them. For example, if you love spicy food but it sets your stomach on fire, try using milder spices or incorporating them in smaller amounts. And remember, portion size matters.
Okay, so it's about being a savvy diner, not a deprived one. I can handle that. What about those times when you just can't resist a trigger food? Is there any way to minimize the damage?
Here's a pro tip. Pair trigger foods with non-trigger foods. For example, if you're craving a slice of pizza, have a side salad with it to help balance things out. The non-trigger foods can help neutralize the acid and reduce the risk of reflux.
That's a great strategy. So it's all about strategic pairings and finding that perfect balance. What about alcohol? Is that a complete no-no for people with GERD?
Alcohol is a tricky one because it can relax the LES, making reflux more likely. But if you do choose to drink, moderation is key. Stick to 1 or 2 drinks and avoid drinks that are high in acidity like citrus cocktails or wine.
Okay, good to know. I'll definitely keep that in mind for my next happy hour. What about stress? We've talked about how stress can worsen GERD, but how do we actually manage stress in our already hectic lives?
Stress management is so important, not just for GERD, but for overall well-being. Find activities that help you relax and de-stress. Yoga meditation, deep breathing exercises, spending time in nature, these are all great options. Even something as simple as listening to calming music or taking a warm bath can make a difference.
So it's about finding those pockets of peace in our day to counteract the chaos.
Exactly. And remember, what works for one person might not work for another. It's all about finding what resonates with you and helps you feel grounded and centered.
This has been so helpful. I'm feeling much more equipped to handle my GERD and live my life to the fullest. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something important. When to seek medical attention. What are some red flags that should send us running to the doctor?
You're right, that's crucial. While occasional heartburn is usually nothing to worry about, there are certain symptoms that should never be ignored. If your symptoms are interfering with your daily life, if you're experiencing frequent or severe heartburn, or if you have any trouble swallowing, you need to see a doctor right away.
And what about those less common GERD symptoms we talked about, like hoarseness or chest pain? Should those be cause for concern?
Absolutely. Any unusual or persistent symptoms should be checked out by a doctor just to rule out any serious underlying conditions. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into the world of GERD. I'm feeling so much more knowledgeable and empowered to take control of my health. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and for helping us navigate this fiery condition.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, knowledge is power. And with the right information and strategies, you can absolutely manage GERD and live a full, vibrant life.
And on that empowering note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into GERD. We hope you found it informative, insightful, and maybe even a little bit fun. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. Millions of people manage GERD successfully, and with the right approach, you can too. Thanks for diving deep with us, and until next time, keep those flames in check.